ionic bond. The ionic bond is also called electrovalent bond. It is basically the electrostatic forces of attraction which exist between the two oppositely charged particles, the cation and the anion. The Cauchy and the Lewis were the first one who introduced to this ionic bond, which are formed by the transferring of the electron from a cation to the anion, or from the more less electropositive to the more electronegative one, a more electronegative species. Now, the formation of ionic bond involves certain basic things. We must know about the nature of the atoms which is going to form the ionic bond. Now always remember, the atoms with low ionization enthalpy and electron affinity, also with large size, easily loses electrons and form cation. Now these kind of atoms are the ones which readily forms ionic bond. They are having low ionization enthalpy, so they can easily lose electron. They have they have low electron affinity, so they can't attract the electrons towards themselves. And also they have large sizes, so that's why it becomes much easier to take out electron from these atoms. So all these sort of things which we find are existing in the atoms, those atoms readily forms ionic bond, and basically they will be forming cations. Similarly, now those atoms with high ionization energy, electron affinity, and small atomic size, easily accepts electron and forms anion. So the other kind of atom which is going to accept this transferring of the electron must have high ionization energy, high electron affinity, and the small atomic size, so that its nuclear charge is very effective. Such type of atomic species forms what? Form anions, and this is how the electrostatic forces of attraction develops between them, which is called an ionic bond. Another important thing. The other important thing which is associated with this is its formation. The formation of the ionic bond involves a complete cycle called Born-Haber's cycle. Now this explains us how ionic bond between the ionic species is formed from the normal atoms. But before proceeding into the Born-Haber cycle and understand exactly the steps involved in the formation of an ionic bond, let us first understand the trend of the formation of the ionic bond in the periodic table. Now as we have known about the nature of the atoms which should be there in the atoms, let us now study the trend. Now in a period, the tendency to form ionic bond decreases. Why it decreases? Because the atomic size, ionization energy, electron affinity, they all increases. So it becomes difficult to take out electron. So what we find is, as if we move from left to right, the tendency to form ionic bonds decreases. In a very similar way, in a group, what we find is in a group, the tendency to form ionic bond increases because atomic size increases, ionization enthalpy, but ionization enthalpy and electron affinity decreases. So since there is a decrease in the ionization energy and the electron affinity, it becomes what easier for the atoms to lose electron, and since the atomic size is also increasing, along the period it decreases, and along the group when we move down it increases. So what happens is it becomes much more easier and convenient for the atoms to lose electron. So tendency to form ionic bond in down the group in a group increases. So that's the usual trend we have for the formation of ionic bonds. Born-Haber cycle. Born-Haber cycle explains us the steps involved in the formation of an ionic bond between an ionic species, or we can take it's an explanation that in what steps of ionic bond is formed between a cation and an anion in an ionic compound. It gives us a series of steps which are involved in this process, and it also tells us the total amount of energy actually required in these steps is equal to the sum is equal to the formation enthalpy of that particular formation energy of that particular compound. Now let us see what all are the steps which are involved in the formation of an ionic bond. We have taken an example of the formation of a very common ionic compound, sodium chloride, from the solid sodium and the chlorine gas. When these two are reacted, sodium chloride is formed. Now the steps involved are 5 steps. First, the sodium solid is given sublimation energy. These are the symbol of sublimation energy, which converts this solid sodium to gaseous sodium. Then this gaseous sodium is given energy which is called ionization enthalpy, which ionizes this gaseous sodium to sodium ion, the cation, and releases electron. Third energy is the energy which is involved in the breaking up of a bond which is present between 2 chlorine atoms from the gaseous state, which gives 2 chlorine gaseous atom. What we will do, basically we will half this energy because we will be only using only one mole of chloride atoms in the formation of this NaCl. Because how we can balance this? We can balance this equation by multiplying by half. So we will use only half of this energy. Once the chlorine atoms are formed in the gaseous state, they readily accept these electrons and which are released by the sodium, and they form chloride ions in the gaseous state. The energy in this case is not given, it is released, and the energy released in this case is called electron gain enthalpy or energy. So in the first 3 steps, whatever the energies are involved are all given to these reactions in order to make this reaction to take place, whereas in the case of the 4th example, the electron's energy is released. Now the last step, once we have sodium ions and the chloride ions in the gaseous state, they both combine with each other and solid NaCl is formed, and the energy released in this process is released again in this process is called lattice enthalpy. Now what is important to notice that this overall energy, whatever the energy is involved in this process in the formation of this NaCl, will be equal to the sum of all these 5 energies. I can write it like this: the formation energy of NaCl is equal to the sublimation energy of sodium solid plus ionization energy of sodium gaseous atom plus bond energy of chlorine molecule gas plus electron gain enthalpy of chlorine gaseous atom plus hydration energy of, not exactly hydration, it will be lattice energy of sodium chloride. So this is equal to the sum of these 5 energies, and this cycle which we get is called Born-Haber cycle. The main purpose of studying this cycle is first to understand the formation of the ionic bonds, and the next most important is to find out the value of this lattice energy. This lattice energy is a very important concept because this energy gives us a lot of idea about the stability of the ionic compound which is formed. The higher is this energy, more stronger ionic bonds are formed between the ions, so more stable will be the ionic compound. So this energy is a very valuable, gives very valuable information regarding the nature of the ionic compound. That's why this cycle is used, which is actually to find out this value. We will study this in detail in the thermodynamics chapter, of course, but here it is only given in order to make you clear the importance of this lattice enthalpy.